The sun rose slowly over the wide, endless plains of Texas, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. On the edge of that horizon stood the largest ranch for miles, a sea of golden grass, wooden fences, and herds of cattle moving lazily under the morning light. This land, stretching as far as the eye could see, belonged to one man, Daniel Hayes, a ranch owner whose name carried respect in every corner of the county. He had everything a man could dream of: wealth, land, horses, and a reputation built on hard work. Yet, behind all that success, there was a silence that clung to his life like a shadow. Inside the large two-story ranch house, Daniel walked through hallways that echoed with his own footsteps. Every room was neatly kept, every piece of furniture polished, but the house felt empty. Years ago, this house had been full of laughter and the voices of his parents. Now there was only him. He often stopped at the family dining table, looking at the row of chairs, each one a reminder of the life he once had. At 36 years old, Daniel had built a fortune, but he had no one to share it with. His days started early. By dawn, he was in his boots and hat, ready to work alongside his ranch hands. He wasn't the kind of owner who gave orders from the porch. He worked shoulder to shoulder with the men, fixing fences, feeding the animals, and riding out into the fields. From the outside, his life looked perfect. Strong horses, healthy cattle, and the respect of everyone around. But when the day's work was done and the sun sank behind the hills, a different kind of emptiness filled the air. At night, after dinner, Daniel would often sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The stars over Texas were bright, a blanket of light that stretched forever. Some nights he would tilt his head back and stare, wondering if somewhere out there was someone looking at the same sky, someone who might one day walk into his life. It wasn't a dream of wealth or beauty he longed for. It was companionship, the feeling of belonging to someone and having someone belong to him. He had come close once, years ago, to marrying a girl from a neighboring town. She was sweet, full of life, but she left for the city, chasing dreams bigger than the ranch could hold. Daniel never blamed her. In fact, he respected her choice. But from that day on, he stopped looking. He buried himself in his work, telling himself that love wasn't written in his stars. Yet, deep down, the hope never truly died. People around town admired Daniel, but they also found him hard to approach. His quiet, thoughtful nature often made him seem distant. He wasn't a man of many words. Instead, he spoke with his actions. If a neighbor's fence broke, he was the first to show up with tools. If someone needed help during a storm, Daniel would be there before the sheriff. Those acts of kindness showed the truth about his heart. Behind the serious eyes and broad shoulders was a good man who cared deeply for people, even if he didn't say it out loud. On Sundays, when the ranch work slowed down, Daniel liked to ride alone. He had a favorite spot, a small hill that overlooked the entire valley. There, with the wind brushing against his face, he would close his eyes and imagine what it would be like to share that view with someone. Sometimes he could almost hear a laugh, soft and warm, as if the wind was teasing it with something he didn't yet have. Inside the house, the signs of his solitude were everywhere. The kitchen was large, but meals were simple. The dining room table could seat 12, but most nights he ate alone at one end. The living room had a big fireplace, but the only company there was a crackling of the wood. The walls held pictures of his parents, the ranch in its early days, and trophies from rodeos he once competed in. Not a single picture of a family of his own. It was as if the walls were waiting for a new story to be written. Despite everything, Daniel never let loneliness turn to bitterness. Instead, it made him patient. He believed life had its own way of surprising people. He wasn't looking for someone in the bars of town or in the loud city streets. If love was meant to come, it would come when the time was right. Until then, he focused on what he did best, caring for his land and his people. As the day ended, the ranch would fall quiet. The ranch hands went home. The animals settled in their barns, and the last glow of sunlight faded over the horizon. Alone in his study, Daniel often sat by the window, the sound of the wind outside keeping him company. He would take out an old guitar his father gave him, strumming a few notes, not to perform but to feel closer to something he missed. Music, in those quiet hours, felt like a friend who understood him. It was on one such evening, when the air was colder than usual and the wind howled a little louder, that he found himself thinking again about how life could change in a single moment. He had no idea that beyond the hills and the dirt road that led into town, someone else was out there, someone whose world was about to collide with his in the most unexpected way. For now, all he could do was close his eyes and let the sound of the wind fill the silence, unaware that this silence was about to end forever. The same morning that Daniel Hayes rode out to check on his cattle, far from his ranch, a young woman sat on a worn leather seat inside a dusty bus, staring out the window as the wide plains rolled past. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 24 years old, and in her hand she carried nothing more than a small suitcase and a guitar in a black case. For as long as she could remember, her dream had been to sing, not just in bars or cafes, but to perform songs that told stories, songs that made people feel less alone. It was a dream that kept her moving from one small town to another, performing wherever she could find an audience. Emily wasn't from wealth. She had grown up in a small, crowded apartment in a city where music was her only escape from the noise of life. Every night, she would sing to herself, imagining a future where her voice could carry her beyond those four walls. Over the years, that voice became strong, filled with emotion, and people started to notice. She began performing at small venues, slowly building a reputation as the girl with the guitar and the golden voice. When she received an invitation to perform at a festival in a distant county, she didn't hesitate. It wasn't a big festival by city standards, but for Emily, every chance to sing for a new audience was precious. She packed her few belongings, slung her guitar over her shoulder, and bought a ticket for the long trip. The journey started well. The morning was bright. The road stretched endlessly, and she felt hopeful. But as the hours passed, the weather began to turn. The sky grew heavy with clouds, and a cold wind swept across the open land. The old bus rattled and groaned against the gusts, until finally, with a loud hiss, it came to a sudden stop on a remote stretch of road. The driver announced that there was an engine problem, and it couldn't go any further until help arrived. The passengers looked around at each other, frustrated. For Emily, it was more than frustration. It was fear. She was in the middle of nowhere. No station, no town in sight, just endless land and a cold that was starting to bite. An hour passed, then another. The driver eventually told everyone to make their own arrangements if they could. "I'm calling for help," he said, "but it might be hours before someone gets here." Some passengers managed to call friends or family. Others started walking toward the last town they passed. Emily, however, had no one to call. Her phone had no signal, and she didn't know anyone in this part of the state. Determined not to give up, she gathered her things and began walking along the dirt road. The wind grew sharper, and every step seemed harder than the last. Her coat was thin, and soon the cold began to seep into her bones. Still, she pressed on, telling herself that there must be a town ahead. After what felt like forever, she reached a small train station, a lonely, abandoned place that looked as if it hadn't seen a train in days. The wooden platform creaked under her feet, and the single bench was coated in dust. She sat there, pulling her coat tighter, hoping that at least the building would shield her from the wind. Hours went by. The sun disappeared behind the clouds, and the temperature dropped even more. Emily opened her suitcase, searching for anything warm, but all she were stage clothes, light dresses, nothing that could keep her from freezing. She hadn't eaten since morning, and now hunger gnawed at her stomach, making her weak. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought of home, not the city itself, but the warmth of her mother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking, the comfort of being safe. She had left all that behind because she believed in something bigger than fear. But tonight, sitting on that deserted platform, the dream felt far away. Her fingers, stiff from the cold, reached for her guitar. If nothing else, music was still with her. She began to strum softly, the strings trembling under her touch. The notes floated in the empty air. Carried away by the wind, she sang a quiet song, one she had written for herself during lonely nights. Her voice was soft, cracked from the cold, but there was still beauty in it. Minutes turned into another hour. The road remained empty. Not a single person passed by. She looked down at her phone again. Still no signal. The hunger in her belly was now replaced by a dull ache, and the cold was winning. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt completely helpless. As evening crept in, the world around her grew darker. The wind howled through the trees, and the old wooden boards of the station groaned like ghosts. Emily hugged her suitcase and whispered, "Please, just let me get somewhere safe tonight." Little did she know that fate was already working in her favor. Beyond the horizon, in a direction she couldn't see, a man on horseback was making his way home after a long day on the ranch. Their worlds, so different from each other, were about to collide. For now, though, she sat alone, shivering under the pale light of the setting sun, waiting for a miracle. The evening wind had grown sharper, sweeping through the open land with an icy bite. Daniel Hayes rode along the dirt road on his chestnut horse, making his way back from the far pastures. He had been out longer than usual, checking the cattle and repairing a broken fence, and now the horizon was almost swallowed by the coming night. Normally, at this hour, there was nothing but empty road ahead of him. But tonight, something caught his eye, a dark figure sitting on the old wooden platform of the train station that hardly anyone used anymore. At first, Daniel thought he might be imagining it. No one had reason to be out here in the cold. He slowed his horse, narrowing his eyes, and as he drew closer, he saw her, a young woman, curled up on a bench, hugging a suitcase to her chest. Her head was bowed, strands of hair falling out from under a thin scarf. The black guitar case leaned against her leg like a silent companion. For a moment, he hesitated. Strangers were rare in these parts, and a man like him had learned to be cautious. But there was something about her stillness that made him uneasy. He dismounted his horse and walked slowly toward her, boots crunching on the gravel. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice steady but gentle. Emily lifted her head at the sound, startled. Her lips were pale, and there was a tiredness in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope. For a second, she didn't answer, unsure if she could trust him. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, she had no choice but to take the risk. She started, her voice rough in the cold. "My bus broke down. I tried walking. I thought maybe I could find a town, but there's nothing here." Daniel nodded slowly, taking in her situation. "You been out here long?" "Since afternoon," she said softly. "No signal on my phone. No food either. I was just waiting, hoping someone would come by." The honesty in her voice struck him. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just explaining, and that alone was enough to move him. He glanced at her thin coat and the way she shivered despite trying to hold herself still. "This is no place to be sitting out," he said, pulling off one of his gloves and offering his hand. "I've got a ranch not far from here. You can warm up there, get some food, and figure out what you want to do next." Emily hesitated. She looked at the stranger standing before her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with kind but serious eyes. His cowboy hat shadowed most of his face, but there was nothing threatening about him. Still, go with a stranger was not something she did lightly. "I don't want to trouble you," she murmured. "It's no trouble," he said firmly. "You'll freeze if you stay here. Trust me, miss, I won't leave you here in the cold." For a long moment, she just held his gaze, searching for any sign of harm in his expression. There was none. There was only a calm, steady presence, like someone used to carrying other people's burdens. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. Daniel reached for her suitcase first, then picked up her guitar with surprising care, as if he knew it mattered to her. "Come on," he said. "You can ride my horse with me. It's just a short way." She stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting so long, and followed him to the horse. He helped her up, making sure she was seated securely before swinging himself into the saddle behind her. The ride back was quiet at first. The rhythm of the horse's hooves on the dirt road was steady, and the warmth of the animal was a welcome relief from the biting cold. Emily could feel the solid strength of the man behind her, and though she was still wary, there was also a strange sense of safety she hadn't felt all day. After a few minutes, Daniel broke the silence. "What's your name?" "Emily," she said softly. "I'm Daniel Hayes," he replied. "You headed somewhere specific?" "There was a festival," she explained. "I was supposed to perform there. But I don't even know if I'll make it now. He glanced at the guitar case in her lap. Singer, huh? Yes, she said, a little embarrassed. I sing and play. It's pretty much all I do. There was a pause, then he said simply, Takes guts to chase something like that. She wasn't sure how to answer, so she just gave a small nod. When they finally reached the ranch, the large wooden house stood against the night sky like a beacon. Daniel dismounted and helped her down. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, and as soon as she stepped inside, the heat from the fireplace wrapped around her like a blanket. The inside of the ranch house was rustic but welcoming. Wooden floors, shelves lined with books, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Daniel set her suitcase and guitar down carefully near the wall. You sit here, he said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. I'll get you something warm to drink. Emily sank into the chair, feeling the stiffness in her fingers slowly begin to fade. She glanced around, taking in the house. So big and yet so quiet. It felt like a place full of stories, waiting to be told. When Daniel returned with a steaming cup of coffee, she accepted it with both hands, grateful for the heat. Thank you, she said, her voice low but sincere. You can stay here tonight, he said. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. You're safe here, Emily. For the first time that day, she felt a small flicker of relief. Looking at him, she realized she had stumbled, by pure chance, into the kindness of a stranger, a kindness that would soon change the course of her life. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but inside the ranch house, the world suddenly felt warmer, as if fate had drawn a line from her lonely bench on that train platform straight to this moment. The morning light poured through the wide windows of the Hayes ranch house, soft and golden, painting the wooden floor in long stripes. Emily woke up slowly on a neatly made bed in a guest room. She hadn't expected to sleep in the night before. For a few seconds she lay there, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, unsure of where she was. Then, the events of the previous night came back to her. The cold, the lonely platform, the stranger on horseback who had brought her here. It was quiet. So quiet that she could hear the faint crackle of a fireplace somewhere down the hall. No horns blaring, no people rushing, no clatter of city life. She sat up and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, feeling both grateful and slightly out of place. Everything about this house, from the rough wooden furniture to the smell of strong coffee drifting through the air, spoke of a life very different from her own. When she opened the door, the hallway stretched ahead, decorated with old photographs of cattle, horses, and a younger version of Daniel with his family. The pictures seemed to tell stories of generations that had lived and worked on this land. She followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen, where she found Daniel already awake, sitting at the table with a mug in his hand, reading a worn-out ledger. You're up early, he said, looking up with a small, polite smile. I guess I'm not used to sleeping somewhere so peaceful, she replied honestly. He gestured to the chair across from him. Coffee? Yes, please. She sat down, feeling awkward but oddly comfortable in the warmth of the kitchen. He poured her a cup and slid it across the table. For a moment, they drank in silence. Outside the window, the land stretched endlessly, a sea of gold and brown, dotted with horses grazing in the distance. Emily couldn't remember the last time she had seen so much open space. This is your home? She asked, her voice soft. Has been my whole life, Daniel said. My parents ran this ranch before me. I just try to keep it going. She nodded, looking out at the view again. It's beautiful. Very different from where I come from. City girl? Born and raised, she said with a small laugh. Crowded streets, traffic lights on every corner. The only wide open spaces I ever saw were the billboards. Daniel chuckled quietly, a sound so rare it surprised even him. This must feel like another world. It does, she admitted. I don't think I've ever heard silence like this before. It's almost too quiet. Back home, there's always something happening. Music, cars, people shouting. Here it's just the wind. That's the thing about ranch life, he said. It gives you space to hear your own thoughts. After breakfast, Daniel offered to show her around before she decided what she wanted to do next. Emily hesitated for only a moment before following him out onto the porch. The crisp morning air hit her cheeks, but this time she was ready for it. The ranch spread out before her, like a painting. Fences lined the fields, horses moved slowly across the grass, and beyond everything were hills that seemed to touch the sky. A few men were already at work, fixing fences and tending to cattle. "This place is huge," Emily said, walking down the steps with him. 8,000 acres, he replied. "Plenty to keep me busy." They started walking, and Daniel explained small things about the ranch as they went. How the horses were trained, the way the cattle were rotated through pastures, how water was stored for dry seasons. Emily listened intently, realizing how little she knew about a life like this. In her world, success was measured by applause and bright lights. Here, it was measured by the strength of the land and the health of the animals. At one point, they stopped near a corral where a group of horses stood, their coats glistening in the sunlight. Daniel leaned against the fence, watching them. "You ride?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "Closest I've been to a horse is on a poster." "We'll fix that," he said with a faint grin. For the first time since she'd met him, she noticed the way his eyes softened when he smiled. There was something calm and steady about him, like the land he cared for. As they walked back toward the house, she told him more about her music, the little gigs and coffee shops, the songs she wrote about places she'd never been, and how she hoped one day to make enough of a name for herself that she wouldn't have to live out of a suitcase. "What made you start singing?" he asked. "It was the only thing that ever felt like mine," she said. "In a city where everything is loud, music was the one thing that made me feel quiet inside." He nodded thoughtfully, as if he understood more than she expected. The rest of the day passed slowly but pleasantly. While Daniel worked outside, Emily spent time in the kitchen, watching the rhythms of ranch life unfold through the window. It amazed her how different everything was here. Meals weren't ordered from restaurants. They were cooked with ingredients from the land. People didn't rush. They worked steadily, in tune with the sun and the weather. As evening came, she sat on the porch with her guitar, playing a soft melody. The notes drifted out across the yard, catching Daniel's attention as he returned from the stables. He stopped for a moment, listening. It wasn't a fancy performance, just a simple song, but there was something about the way she played that felt honest. "You've got a gift," he said when she finished. She looked up at him, a little shy. "Thank you. Music is the only way I know how to talk about things that are hard to say." For a few seconds, they just looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Two people from different worlds, finding a strange, unexpected comfort in each other's company. That night, as she returned to the guest room, Emily couldn't help but feel that the ranch was already beginning to change something inside her. And Daniel, standing by the porch rail watching the horizon, couldn't shake the thought that his quiet world had just gotten a little less lonely. The days that followed began to fall into a rhythm, one that felt surprisingly easy for Emily despite the strangeness of the new world she had stepped into. Mornings started with the smell of coffee, the sound of boots on wooden floors, and the distant voices of ranch hands calling out to each other as the day's work began. Daniel was always up before the sun, and by the time she made her way to the kitchen, he was usually back for a brief breakfast, quiet but polite, before heading out again. For Emily, those mornings became a time to write in her notebook, to jot down lyrics and little thoughts inspired by the vast landscape around her. She had never known a place could feel so big and yet so calming at the same time. One evening, after a particularly long day for Daniel, she found him sitting on a porch as the sun dipped low, the orange glow stretching across the fields. He looked tired, his shoulders heavy, but there was a kind of peace in his expression as he watched the horizon. She stood at the doorway for a moment, holding her guitar, and then decided to join him. "Mind if I sit?" she asked gently. "Not at all," he said, shifting slightly to give her space on the wooden steps. For a while, they simply sat there, saying nothing, the quiet broken only by the wind and the occasional whinny of a horse in the distance. Then, almost without thinking, she opened her guitar case and began to strum. The notes were soft, slow, and sweet, like the sound of the wind moving through the tall grass. Daniel glanced at her, a little surprised, but didn't say a word. He just listened. The song she played was one of her own. The lyrics spoke of roads that never seemed to end, of searching for a place to belong, and of a heart that still hoped for something better. Her voice was warm, tinged with the kind of longing that came from living too many nights alone. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Daniel said quietly, "That's a fine song." "Thanks," she replied, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "I wrote it on one of those long trips where I felt like no one in the world even knew I existed." "I know the feeling," he said. She turned to look at him, surprised. "You?" He leaned back against the porch post, his gaze on the horizon. "People see the land and think that means you're never alone. Truth is, it can get mighty lonely out here. Big house, big ranch, none of it means much if there's no one to share it with." It was the first time he had said anything personal to her, and she could hear the honesty in his voice. "Was there ever someone?" she asked softly. "There was," he admitted, "years back. Thought I was going to marry her, but she wanted more than this place could give her. She left, and I stayed." Emily lowered her eyes, feeling a pang of empathy. "I'm sorry." He shrugged lightly. "Life happens. After that, I just figured this ranch was all I had left to care for." There was something about the way he said it. Not bitter, just resigned. That made her heart ache a little, without thinking too much about it. She started playing again, this time choosing a different song, something gentler, like a lullaby. She sang as if the words were meant just for him. Daniel sat still, his elbows resting on his knees, listening. The sound of her voice carried through the fading evening like a thread pulling two distant lives closer. When she stopped, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken. "You know," he said finally, "I haven't heard music in this house for a long time. Not like that. It feels good." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I ended up here. Maybe this place needed a little music again." That made him chuckle. A rare low laugh that made her glance at him. It was a kind of laugh that came from deep down, unpracticed and real. She noticed then, in the soft glow of dusk, that his serious eyes had a warmth she hadn't seen before. As the days went on, the porch became their place. Some evenings she played, other evenings they just talked. About the land, about the places she had traveled, about the kind of life that neither of them had imagined sharing with someone else. She started to notice the small things he did without thinking. The way he always carried her guitar back inside, so she wouldn't have to. The way he made sure there was hot coffee ready in the mornings. The way he slowed his steps just enough so she could keep up when they walked the ranch together. And he noticed things about her, too. How she hummed when she cooked, how she closed her eyes when the wind caught her hair, how she treated every animal on the ranch as if it had been waiting its whole life for her to say hello. There was nothing rushed or dramatic about it. Their connection grew quietly, like a slow flame. It was built on simple conversations, shared silences, and the bond of music that seemed to bridge the gap between their two very different worlds. One night, after she finished another song, Daniel turned to her and said, "Emily, when you sing, it's like this place doesn't feel so empty anymore." She looked at him, her eyes meeting his, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. The sound of the wind filled the space between them, and in that stillness, something gentle and unspoken settled in both their hearts. It wasn't love yet, not quite, but it was the start of something that neither of them had expected to find. By the time a week had passed, word had already spread to the small town near the ranch. Daniel Hayes, the quiet, reserved rancher who never let anyone close, had taken in a stranger, and not just any stranger, a young woman from the city with a guitar. It started as whispers in the general store, quiet remarks at the diner. By the second week, the whispers had become louder. People were curious, and curiosity in a small town often came mixed with judgment. "Who is she?" someone asked at the feed store. "Probably just passing through," another said, but there was doubt in his tone. A few folks even warned Daniel's ranch hands, suggesting that city people only brought trouble. Emily didn't hear most of it directly, but she felt in the looks when she went into town with Daniel to buy supplies. She saw the way some people stared a little too long, how conversation stopped for a moment when she passed by. One afternoon, back at the ranch, she finally asked him, "They don't like me much, do they?" Daniel was tightening a saddle strap and paused, looking up at her. "They don't know you," he said. "Small towns can be slow to trust. Don't pay it any mind." She nodded, but the words stayed with her. The truth was, Emily was starting to feel a growing weight inside her. The longer she stayed at the ranch, the more she realized how different this world was from the one she came from. Out here, everyone knew everyone. Everyone belonged to someone's history. She was a stranger, a traveler who might be gone tomorrow, and that made her wonder if she even had a right to be here at all. One evening, after a long day, she sat alone on the porch steps with her guitar on her lap. Daniel came back from the fields later than usual, dust on his boots and shoulders tired. He stopped when he saw her expression. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm just thinking," she said. "About what?" "About how different everything is here. About whether I'm intruding." He leaned against the porch rail. "You're not intruding. If you were, I wouldn't have asked you to stay." "But don't you feel it?" she asked, turning to look at him. "The way people stare in town, like they think I don't belong." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Emily, this is a small community. Folks talk, but that doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. They'll get used to you." She gave him a faint smile but said nothing more. For Daniel, the tension in town was something he had expected. He had lived there long enough to know how quickly people could form opinions. What he hadn't expected was how much it bothered him to see her worried. That night, as he sat alone in his study, he thought about everything that was happening. His days had always been simple. Work, the ranch, keeping things running smoothly. Since Emily had arrived, that rhythm had been shaken, but in a way that had made him feel alive again. Now, though, he had to face a different reality. Taking care of a ranch was one thing. Taking care of someone else's heart was another. In the following days, the strain became more noticeable. The ranch hands respected Daniel too much to speak out, but even they were curious. Some of them asked harmless questions, where she came from, how long she was staying, but behind their curiosity, there was a kind of unspoken worry about change. Emily tried to help around the ranch, wanted to show she wasn't just there to take up space. She learned to cook simple meals in the big kitchen. She helped clean the porch, and sometimes she even fed the horses. Still, there were moments when she felt like no matter how much she tried, she would always be the outsider. One afternoon, she overheard two women in town talking as she picked up a few supplies alone. "Pretty little thing," one said, "but what's a girl like that doing with him?" "Probably just passing through," the other replied. "Someone like her won't last here. City people never do." Emily walked out of the store with the words echoing in her head. That night, back at the ranch, she told Daniel she had been thinking about leaving soon. "You don't have to do that," he said firmly. "I don't want to cause trouble for you," she said. "This is your home, your world, and I'm just someone who doesn't fit in." He ran a hand over his face, frustrated. "Emily, don't make decisions based on what people say. You got to give them time." She hesitated. "But what about you? Doesn't it bother you? Doesn't it make things harder?" Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and said, "I've handled harder things in gossip. I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about you, about whether you can stand this kind of life." His words softened something in her, but they also scared her, because the truth was, she didn't know if she could. As the days passed, Daniel found himself pulled between two worlds. On one side was a responsibility he had always carried. The ranch, the land, the expectations of the people around him. On the other side was this unexpected connection with a woman who had brought music back into his silent home. Every evening, he rode out into the fields, and somewhere between the wind and the open sky, he tried to figure out what he wanted. He had never asked for her to come into his life, but now that she was here, the thought of her leaving made the land feel emptier than ever. For Emily, the music helped her through the confusion. Every night she played, even when no one was listening, try and make sense of her own heart. And somewhere in the middle of all this, subtle signs began to show. The way Daniel's eyes softened when she smiled, the way she always looked for him when she heard the sound of boots on the porch. But beneath that growing bond was a shadow of doubt, cast by a town that wasn't ready to see them together, and by a question neither of them yet knew how to answer. Was a connection born of chance strong the morning she decided to leave? The ranch was quieter than usual. Emily had been awake long before sunrise, sitting on the edge of the guest bed with her suitcase open on the floor. For days, the thought had been building in her mind like a storm. Every look in town, every whispered word, every doubt she cared about whether she belonged here. She had tried to push it away, but now it felt like the only choice left to her. Her fingers lingered on the handle of her guitar case. It wasn't just about the townspeople. It was about him. Daniel belonged to this land, to this way of life that was steady and rooted, and she belonged to something else entirely, a restless world of music, of travel, of never staying in one place. No matter how much she cared for what she had found here, she couldn't shake the fear that she was disrupting the only world he knew how to live in. When the sun finally came up, painting the fields gold, she stepped outside with her bags. Daniel was already in the yard, tightening a saddle. He looked up when he heard the door close. The moment his eyes fell on the suitcase in her hand, he froze. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice low. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I think it's for the best." His hand stilled on the saddle strap. "Why?" "You know why," she said softly. "I don't belong here, Daniel. Your life and mine, they're too different. I can feel it every time I step into town. And I can see it in their eyes, too. I don't want to be the reason people start looking at you differently." "They don't matter," he said, sharper than he intended. "Let them talk. That's just how it is around here." "It's not just them," she whispered. "It's me. I don't know how to be this person. I came here by accident, and for a while it felt like maybe I could stay. But every day I feel more out of place. And I can't do that to you." Daniel stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You think this has been a burden to me? You think I wanted you gone?" "I think," she said, her voice shaking now, "that if I stay, it will only hurt more when I have to go. And I can't ask you to carry that." For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at her, as if trying to find the right words. But the words wouldn't come. Finally, he said, quietly but firmly, "If that's what you've decided, I won't stop you. I can't stop you." Her heart ached at the sound of his voice, steady but filled with something she hadn't heard before, a kind of hurt he was trying hard to hide. They walked together to the edge of the ranch road, where a pickup truck from town was waiting to take her back. Neither of them spoke during the short walk. The air between them was heavy, and every step felt like it carried the weight of everything they hadn't said to each other. When they reached the truck, Emily turned to face him. The wind tugged at her hair, but she barely noticed. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything. For saving me that night. For letting me stay here. For—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You just take care of yourself out there." She opened her mouth to say something more, but the words caught in her throat. So instead, she reached for her guitar and held it close, the way she always did when she didn't know what else to hold on to. For a brief moment, he thought she might change her mind, that she might drop the suitcase and stay. But then she stepped back, the distance between them growing in more ways than one. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered. "Goodbye, Emily," he replied. She climbed into the truck, and as it pulled away, Daniel stood there, watching the dust rise from the road behind her. He didn't move until the truck was out of sight, back in town. Emily sat in silence during the ride, her hands tight around her guitar. She stared out the window, the open land passing by, each mile putting more distance between her and a ranch that had started to feel like home. Her chest ached with the kind of hurt that comes from leaving something you never expected to find. Daniel, on the other hand, returned to his work as if nothing had changed. He fixed fences, fed the cattle, and walked the fields. But everything was different. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. The porch was silent at night, no music drifting through the air. In the evenings, he found himself standing where she had once sat, looking out the same horizon, but now the quiet fell heavier. He realized how much space she had filled in his life without him noticing, how much she had changed the rhythm of his days. For Emily, the city welcomed her back with all its noise and movement, but it no longer felt the same. Every time she played her guitar, she thought of the porch, of the wide open sky, of the man who had given her a place to belong even when she didn't believe she deserved it. Both of them knew, in different corners of the world, that something had been left behind on that ranch road. something that neither of them had been ready to lose. Enough to survive everything standing in its way. The weeks after Emily left were the longest of Daniel's life. The ranch kept him busy from dawn until after dark, but work no longer had the same rhythm. He moved through his days like a man half awake, doing everything he was supposed to do, but feeling as if something vital had been stripped away. The silence that used to be comforting now pressed on him like a weight. Every time he walked past the guest room, empty and quiet, it reminded him of what he'd lost. At night, when the sky stretched endless and starry above the open fields, he would sit on the porch and remember the sound of her voice, the way music had once filled that silence. He told himself she had made her choice and that he had to respect it. But as the days stretched into weeks, one thought began to take hold. Maybe he had let her walk away too easily. One evening, as he stood by the fence line watching the horses, it finally hit him like a sudden summer storm. He couldn't do this without her. He didn't just miss her, he needed her. And if that meant leaving the comfort of his land to find her in her world, then that's exactly what he would do. The next morning, he saddled his truck instead of his horse. For the first time in years, he locked up the ranch and drove away, heading toward the nearest town with a vague plan and a determination he hadn't felt since he was a younger man. He had no address, no clear direction. Only a few hints she had given in their conversations about the towns she traveled to for small performances. It took days of asking questions at roadside diners, checking flyers, and stopping at music cafes where singers passed through. Most people didn't know her by name, but when he described her, a young woman with a guitar and a voice that could stop you in your tracks, sometimes they would pause, think, and point him toward the next town. By then, the third day, he pulled into a modest little town with a single main street and a small, weathered cafe with a sign out front that read, "Live music tonight." Something about the way the letters leaned, a little uneven, made him stop. He parked the truck and went inside. The cafe was warm, lit by strings of lights that hung across the low ceiling. It smelled of coffee and baked bread. At the far end of the room, there was a small stage with just one microphone and one stool. And there she was. Emily sat on the stool, guitar in her lap, her head tilted slightly as she sang. The song wasn't one he recognized. It was new, and every word sounded like it had been pulled from somewhere deep in her heart. For a moment, he just stood in the doorway, unable to move. She looked different, but the same. Still the same gentle presence. The same voice that had once filled every corner of his ranch with light. He felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of relief and longing that nearly knocked the air out of him. When the song ended, the small crowd clapped politely. Emily gave them a shy smile and thanked them before looking down at her guitar, adjusting the strings for the next song. That was when she saw him. For a second, she froze. Her hands stopped moving. Her eyes widened, and the noise of the cafe faded away. It was as if the whole world had gone still. Daniel walked forward slowly, his hat in his hands. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly, her voice barely carrying over the microphone. "I came to find you," he said, his deep voice steady even though his heart was pounding. There was a murmur from the crowd, curious but polite, as they watched. Emily blinked, unsure what to say. "Why?" "Because," he said, taking another step closer, "I can't imagine life without you." The words hung in the air, raw and simple. "I tried," he continued. "I tried going back to the way things were, but every day without you felt wrong. You brought something into my life I didn't even know I was missing, and I was a fool to let you walk away without telling you that." Her eyes burned with tears. "Daniel, I don't care what people say," he said firmly. "I don't care that your world is different from mine. I just know that when you're not there, the ranch feels empty. I feel empty. And I'd rather face every bit of gossip in that town than spend one more day wondering what it would have been like if I'd asked you to stay." The cafe was silent now, every pair of eyes fixed on the man standing by the stage. Emily slowly stood, her guitar still in her hands. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might not be able to speak, but somehow the words found her. "I left because I thought I didn't fit in your life," she whispered. "But these last weeks, I've realized I don't fit anywhere without you." Daniel took a final step toward her, close enough now that he could see the tears in her eyes. "Then come home," he said, his voice low but filled with hope. Emily set her guitar gently on the stool and stepped down from the stage. When she reached him, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her like he was afraid she might disappear again. Applause rose from the cafe, but neither of them heard it. For the first time since she had left, the world felt right again. They didn't have all the answers yet, and the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But as they stood there, holding on to each other, they both knew one thing with absolute certainty. They belonged together, no matter how different their worlds were. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one Daniel had endured during the weeks Emily had been gone. This was a silence full of something new, relief, hope, and a promise that neither of them dared to break by speaking too soon. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her guitar case resting against her legs, watching the open land roll by. Every mile brought her closer to a place she had tried to leave behind, but now realized had become a part of her. When the old wooden gates of the ranch came into view, she felt her heart tighten. It was just as she remembered. The endless fields, the corral, the weathered fences, and the big house standing steady against the wind. For Daniel, pulling up that long dirt drive with her by his side, felt like everything had fallen back into place. He parked the truck near the porch and cut the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emily opened the door and stepped out. The scent of the land, the hay, the earth, the faint trace of horses, washed over her, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Homecoming. "You ready?" Daniel asked softly, coming around the truck. She smiled a little. "More than I thought I'd be." Inside, the house didn't feel empty anymore. The first thing Emily did was place her guitar back in the corner of the living room, where it had always rested before she left. Daniel watched her, his heart lightening with every small sign that she was back where she belonged. Word spread fast, as it always did. Within a few days, the whole town knew that Emily had returned, and that she hadn't come back alone this time. This time, she had come back with Daniel by her side. The whisper started again, but this time, neither of them let it stop them. When they went into town together for supplies, the stares were just as sharp as before, but Daniel didn't care. He walked beside her with a steady calm, tipping his hat politely to those who looked on, his hand brushing against hers, as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. Emily, for her part, lifted her chin a little higher than she had before. She no longer felt like a stranger passing through. She had made her choice. At the diner, an older rancher approached Daniel with a slow shake of his head. "You sure about this, Hayes?" he asked. Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. "I've never been surer about anything in my life," he said. The man glanced at Emily, then back at Daniel, and something in his expression softened. Maybe it was the way Daniel stood, unmovable in his conviction, or the way Emily's hand found his. Whatever it was, he just nodded and said, "Then that's good enough." Slowly, the town began to accept it, not because the gossip stopped, but because Daniel and Emily refused to let it define them. They showed up together. They worked together, and over time, their quiet strength began to speak louder than any rumor. Life at the ranch changed in ways Daniel had never imagined. Evenings were no longer silent. Emily's music returned to the porch, to the fields, to the very heart of the house. And it wasn't just her music that changed things. It was her presence, her laughter, her questions, the way she saw beauty in things Daniel had grown so used to that he'd stopped noticing. For Emily, life changed in its own way. She still sang, still wrote songs, but now she had a place where those songs came from. The endless roads no longer felt like an escape. They were simply paths that always led back here. One late afternoon, as they stood near the corral watching the horses run, Emily said quietly, "Do you ever think about how much has changed?" Daniel nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Every day." "Do you regret it?" she asked. He turned to her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not one bit. You came into my life when I didn't even know what I was missing. You've changed everything." "And you've changed me," she whispered. "I thought I had to keep running to find what I was looking for. Turns out I just needed to stop long enough to see it." They stayed like that for a while, just standing there as the wind swept through the fields. That night, Emily played a new song she had been working on since coming back. The lyrics told their story of a lonely ranch, a chance meeting at a deserted platform, and how love had bridged the distance between two very different worlds. Daniel listened from the porch steps, the glow of the lantern casting a soft light across her face as she sang. By the time she finished, the words lingered in the air like a promise. "You know," he said as she set the guitar down, "I think that might be my favorite song yet." She laughed softly. "That's because it's ours." For the first time in years, the ranch no longer felt like a place of solitude. It had become something more, something alive. And while the work was still hard and the days still long, the weight of it all felt lighter now that they carried it together. In the end, it wasn't just love that had changed everything. It was a choice they had made to hold on. Despite the differences, despite the whispers, despite the fear, it was a courage to believe that two worlds could become one. As the stars spread across the vast Texas sky that night, Daniel reached for Emily's hand and held it, silently promising that this time, no matter what came, he wouldn't let go. Years passed, and with them came seasons that changed the land and the lives of the people who lived upon it. The Hayes Ranch, once known only for its cattle and wide open fields, became something more, a place that carried a story about a man and a woman from two different worlds who had found each other by chance, and against all odds had chosen to stay. Daniel and Emily built their lives slowly, one day at a time. The ranch grew, not just in size, but in spirit. Where once there had been only silence, music now lived. Mornings were still early and full of hard work, but in the evenings, as the sun melted into the horizon, the air often filled with the sound of Emily's guitar. What began as simple porch concerts soon turned into something that people from town, and sometimes far beyond, would come to hear. Friends and neighbors gathered, sitting on the steps, leaning on fence rails, or standing beneath the wide sky, while Emily's songs drifted over the land. Her music, shaped by city lights and lonely highways, now blended with the quiet strength of the countryside. Daniel never sought attention, and neither did Emily. Yet, word spread in ways they could never have imagined. Travelers passing through town would ask about the ranch, where the singer from the city fell in love with the cowboy. Some came just to see the place where that story had taken root, hoping to find a piece of that magic for themselves. The town that had once been wary of Emily slowly changed, too. It wasn't sudden. It was in the way people began greeting her with genuine smiles instead of cautious nods, in the way the diner owner saved the best pie for her, in the way the local children ran up to hear her sing when she came to town. Over time, the gossip faded, replaced with something much stronger, respect. The ranch became a place where both worlds met. There were still cattle, horses, and the steady work that came with them, but there were also nights of music, community, and laughter. It became a place where people could see what happened when love refused to be limited by fear. For Daniel, the change was simple but profound. The man who had once lived in quiet solitude found himself surrounded by life again. The big house no longer felt empty. Its walls held stories. The sound of footsteps, the smell of fresh coffee, the melodies that drifted from room to room. Emily's songs changed, too. They carried pieces of the land in them now. The sigh of the wind, the rhythm of hooves, the quiet heartbeat of a place that had taught her how to stop running. Her voice matured with the years, becoming softer but somehow stronger, and when she sang about love, people believed her. One summer evening, many years after that first meeting, Emily sat on the porch with her guitar resting across her knees. Daniel, now a little older, his hair flecked with silver, leaned against the post beside her. The sun was setting, turning the fields gold. "You ever think about that night?" she asked, strumming gently. "All the time," he said. "If I'd been 5 minutes later, I might never have found you. And if I caught that train," she began. "You wouldn't be here," he finished for her. "And this whole life we built wouldn't exist." She smiled, her eyes soft. Funny how everything can change in a single moment. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. It changed everything. In town, people had started calling it a legend. The story of the singer and the rancher. It was told in barbershops, around campfires, even to the children at the little schoolhouse. It wasn't a fairy tale, though people told it because it was true, because it reminded them that love could still surprise you even when you thought your life was already set. Over time, young singers came to Emily, asking for advice. Couples came to the ranch to take pictures by the gates where Daniel had first brought her home. The ranch itself became a symbol of what could happen when two lives, no matter how different, refused to give up on each other. Years later, when the town held its annual fair, they asked Emily to perform. She stood on the small stage, looking out at the familiar faces. When she sang, her voice carried the story of her life. The city lights, the long roads, the lonely station, the man who had offered her shelter, and the love that had grown out of that chance meeting. In the crowd, Daniel stood near the back, hat in hand, watching her with the same quiet pride he had felt from the very beginning. And as she sang, he thought about everything they'd been through, the whispers, the doubts, the separation, and the return. By the time the last note faded into the evening sky, there wasn't a person in the crowd who didn't feel the truth of their story. As the years went on, the ranch and their love remained. They weathered hardships like all people do. But through it all, they never forgot that everything had started with a single moment, one act of kindness on a cold night. And when people came to visit looking for the legend, what they found was simpler and more powerful than any story. A home where music and love had become inseparable, where two lives had been changed forever, and where the wide-open skies still carried the sound of love that had made history.